This is XTP Media.
Welcome back to The Partnership Edge, the podcast that unlocks the secrets of successful partnerships and alliances. I'm Peter Johnson from XTP, and today I get to speak to one of the most inspirational leaders in industry today. Stevie Spring started out with a law degree before moving into marketing, television and advertising, building her reputation in senior roles at leading agencies and as a growth lead on major accounts. She went on to become CEO of two international media companies, including Clear Channel UK, where she transformed the business into one of the most powerful advertising platforms in the UK. She then went on to Future PLC, where she led large-scale digital transformation and became one of the very few women running a listed media business at that time. Alongside her executive career, she's built a portfolio of non-executive and chair roles, from BBC Children in Need and the environmental charity Groundwork to the British Council. She steered these organisations through complexity and global growth as well as the COVID period. Today, she chairs PRS for Music and the mental health charity Mind and sits on several major commercial boards. Stevie was appointed a CBE in the 2017 birthday honours for services to charity. She has also been named by The Telegraph as one of Britain's 500 most influential people and by GQ magazine as one of the UK's 100 most connected women. Stevie, welcome to the Partnership Edge. It's an honour to have you here.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, and it's a joy to be here. It's always lovely to spend time with you.
Oh, you're a delight, Stevie. But let me go for the jugular straight away. And how important has building trust been to you? You know, on those boards and partnerships during your career.
So that's not going for the jugular, Peter. That's going for the basis of brand reputation, both corporate and personal.
Yeah.
And my personal brand has always been about trust. And I've tried to work with and for organizations that I'm proud of and that deliver. And, you know, without putting too strong a point on it, not even nearly everyone relies on partnerships and strategic relationships. There's a sort of trust dividend in that because it's the lubricant that makes the relationship work.
Yeah.
Same as personal relationships outside of corporates. And, you know, to be trusted, obviously you need to be competent.
Do your job.
I mean, you've got to do the basics, haven't you? You've got you've got to have the basic skills. You've got to have the capacity to deliver. You've got to have, you know, a degree of stability, whether that's financial or otherwise. But it's the brand, it's the personal and corporate brand, that character that gives you permission and allows you to say, I'm going to deliver. And when things go wrong, and they will, I'm going to be honest with you. And when they go wrong, we're going to look for ways to help each other. We're not just going to pull the force majeure lever and walk away.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I mean by the trust dividend, because it's about when you work together with people for the common good long term, not just a series of short-term successes. And at the start of any relationship, you and I both know most bids, in inverted commas, are technically very similar.
Yeah.
Aren't they?
Yeah.
So it's trust that becomes the differentiator.
That's interesting. Let me explore that with you. You know, you've chaired organisations from Children in Need to the British Council, and now you're with PRS. And these are organisations that operate over decades, not just months, and taking that point about time. In retrospect, how early should leaders be investing in trust before they see something manifest itself in results?
Again, I don't think you can put it in that way, Peter. I think it's the golden thread that goes through everything, literally. And it's hard and long won and easily lost.
Yeah.
If I look at where I am now, as you say, I chair PRS for music. 75% of our revenues, and it's one and a bit billion and change. 70% of those revenues are delivered through and with partners. British Council is actually an interesting one because obviously that's 75 years of partnering around the world and relying on inverted commas soft power. And many people, I think, see trust as a soft power. Actually, it's the entire opposite of soft power.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it economically, trust, I believe, is a driver of a reduction in the cost of doing business.
Interesting.
Because if you think about it, when you've got trust both sides, you're not spending money excessively and defensively. You're not over auditing. You're not having thousands of contract policemen. You can make faster decisions. You can do informal resolutions, lower monitoring costs. All of those things feed into the higher the trust quotient, the lower the micromanagement, faster, lower cost, more efficient. So you talk about it as a soft power or a soft differentiator, but actually it should lead to mutuality, because I've heard you talk before about, where are the risks and rewards going to sit and are they fair? But actually, if there's mutual trust coming through, you have a completely different framework for operating.
Yeah.
So I think it goes, coming back to the original question, trust is the golden thread that goes through all relationships. It's the differentiator, all other things being equal, and increasingly they are.
Yeah.
We've largely got the same data points. We've largely got the same skill sets. If you are competent, if you have capacity, if you are resilient, how do you choose between those most likely to succeed? It's very, very, very rarely you're the only person in the world that can deliver on this contract. I mean, I can't, how many times does that happen? There's always optionality. There's always choice.
Yeah.
And with choice comes the tyranny of choice.
Yeah.
And people sometimes get, the fear of getting it wrong outweighs the potential pleasure of getting it right. So what framework do you put around it to try and codify that in the relationship without strangling it at birth?
Let me explore that a little bit more with you then, Stevie. Let's use an example that we use in the white paper. The Clear Channel Ad Shell partnership with London Buses was a strong one. It was renewed several times. I mean, you were involved in that process. Why do you think that partnership was so successful and completely dispute-free?
Well, I think your memory may be playing slight tricks on you, Peter, when you say...
calling me out here, Stevie.
We did go through a statutory scrutiny committee at the GLA.
Yeah.
When there was a group of politicians, small p, who thought the contract was ultra vires because it was too long.
Yeah.
That put pressure on the relationship. But actually going through that pressure, we came out the other side stronger and fitter and holding hands.
Yeah.
But, you're right to pull it out because, it went back to the late 90s. In effect, it's still going strong.
Yeah, it is.
And I think it was about the true concept of joint ownership.
Yeah, shared risk, shared equity.
Yeah, and also on those really long-running 20-year paybacks, longer than 20-year paybacks in some instances, where you've got that massive capital investment up front and then a very volatile income stream to pay it back, big guarantees, fluctuating costs, etc., etc., etc. I think that that's a classic example where transparency is key, because you've got to take a long-term view through that short-term volatility. And if you take if you look at the partnership and you look at the revenue splits, if you like, at any point in the partnership, it's going to be very, very different at the front end, when heavy investment, to the back end when it looks as though you're making a huge amount of money. Well, you're not. You're getting a payback on that initial investment. So the only way that type of partnership makes sense is as transparent as you can be, both in the hard data, look, everything's green on this agenda, and on the soft data, what's the person-to-person relationship like? Because if that breaks down, it undermines everything else.
Right. Let me explore, just while we're on that case study then, this whole issue of balancing the provision of public infrastructure versus that highly commercial advertising model that we had to work with. How did you sat at the pinnacle of those two challenges, where on one side of the fence we had 100, 120 public authorities that we represented, really. We were their face, but had to trade it off against those highly commercial Friday afternoon meetings in Soho with Coca-Cola or McDonald's or big brands like that, who had no interest in public infrastructure but were very interested in the model of delivery. How did you balance those demands in those partners?
Well, arguably, all of those conversations are a zero-sum game.
Okay.
And it's a bit like when you're talking in the real world about work-life balance. You can't be in two places at once. Sometimes you've got to choose between sports day and the Friday afternoon meeting.
Yeah.
And sometimes the Friday afternoon meeting wins and sometimes sports day wins. But that balancing act, providing it is shared, because what you've got is very high fixed costs and fluctuating income levels.
Yeah.
So you've got fixed inventory, fluctuating demand, therefore the price you can charge and the income levels vary, but your cost to serve are pretty flat.
Yeah.
So again, I think that's where it comes down to a balancing act of, can this wait another week? Can I do this next week? Can I do this next month? Whatever. But be open and transparent and make sure that the partners understand that it's not a flat road.
Yeah.
Make sure that in the same way that you're explaining the payback curve, high investment, long-term return, it's not a straight line curve. It is also peaks and troughs, up and down. Make hay while the sun shines. Batten down the hatches when it's not.
Right. Okay. Let me dig now a little bit deeper into some of the personal skills and attributes you have to bring to play. I've been in the position of working for you, I'm working with you and observing what you do elsewhere. Some of those boards that you've both been chief exec on and chair on can be said to be a little bit volatile. Have you had to? How do you manage those deals, those partnerships that look great on paper, but when you're actually in the thick of it, you don't feel the balance of fairness. The risk is allocated in the right way when you've got to be that neutral arbiter as a chairperson to make that right decision. What sort of skills do you bring to managing those volatile situations?
So I always describe when you're chairing a meeting, you have a massive responsibility, a bit like being the conductor of the orchestra, making sure that all the instruments come in at the right time, even the, now the triangle comes in and it's only one note and it's only, 1 note in half an hour. but it's an important part of the structure.
Yeah.
And the phrase that I always like is, when you're trying to solve a problem, you want to see the whole problem. And you need people to shine spotlights on the problem from different angles and different perspectives. So the more diverse people you get in the room with those different perspectives, the more likely you are to see the totality of it. And as chair, your job is to bring in every perspective you can and every voice you can, so that you can collectively solve a problem. And I think when you're co-creating a fix, you get a better and stronger response. Now that's all very theoretical, but if you think of very recent examples of when NI went through the roof at the same time as real living wage.
Yeah.
A lot of the very wafer thin contracts that somebody like our local mines have with NHS providers, brackets, who are excluded from those increases.
Yeah.
You've got 3 6-year term contracts, many of whom didn't have that ratchet in.
Right.
Okay. So then how do you denegotiate, renegotiate, work together on a solution when actually you've got 2 options? Pull the plug.
Yeah.
Give it back. They've got to go back into the marketplace. Nobody's going to pitch at a lower level because of cost inflation.
Yeah.
So you'd much rather work with, or am I going to push my luck and go, do you know what? You'll work through this. You've got some reserves.
Yeah.
Basically underwrite a loss-making contract. That is all about trust. That's all about, we've got a common problem. We've got to get to the best solution. And that's a much easier one to solve than if you've actually breached the contract, broken your promise, because you haven't broken your promise per se.
Yeah.
This is, arguably, it is a foreseeable circumstance, and it should have been written in that cost inflation is included, but you sort of price it in and got it wrong.
Yeah. Stevie,
but it's not the same as you've breached trust and how do you rebuild, because I think that's a separate issue.
We both were connected to groundwork. In fact, you introduced me to groundwork many decades ago, which resulted in Clear Channel Agile being one of the very first organisations mentioned in Parliament about how they work in what we now know as social value. And I remember that project in Bridgend very well, which I turned up and almost had my car taken to pieces. And you do warn me about that. But one of the things that struck me about groundwork is how it punched above its weight with local government chief execs, with central government officers. And when I was an active part of that, I almost felt like in an imposter syndrome. We mentioned that term earlier. Why do you think groundwork was so successful in gaining the trust of those sorts of partners to allow it to do the fabulous work that it did?
Does.
Continues, but not with us in the mix.
I would actually say it's ground up rather than top down. I think that groundwork colleagues went into places in communities that local authority partners didn't feel empowered to go into.
Yeah.
So it was a way of working through. So the groundwork colleagues worked long term to gain the trust of local communities, to facilitate them helping themselves in a way that, because all of the interaction with the local authority was on things like, you haven't mended my broken windows, you haven't done this, you haven't done that, you haven't done the other. The trust wasn't there on many of the issues. So you work through somebody else who is a bridge to the local communities, who has built up trust, who invests the time. I remember when I first got involved with groundwork, I went along to see a project on a local estate in Somerstown, and it had taken 3 years of community consultation and working with, I think it was the Somalian community. Theoretically, it was about cleaning up a patch of waste ground. In reality, it was about building community cohesion.
Yeah.
In a community that was excluded and isolated. And we did it through planting edibles that then became a cookery club that then got particularly the Somalian women who didn't have English as first language to come outside of the house. They bonded with the other local, particularly older people. They then started a lunch club, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
So my corporate solution would be 3 years and whatever it costs. Let's say it was, $100,000. You've got to be joking. I can do that in 3 weeks and it'll cost 10 grand.
Yeah.
No, it won't last a nanosecond because nobody owns it.
Yeah.
Nobody has co-created the solution. You've looked at you've gone straight to the result without the reason why.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I think that was a learning curve to me about borrowed interest and borrowed trust.
Interesting. I like that term.
So the local authority is paying to access a community that they're excluded from through trust built up over empowering the local community to solve their own problems, to co-create.
Yeah, amazing organisation and amazing delivery. Let me come back then to be a bit more confrontational in the commercial world, and maybe when things don't go as well. Can you think of a time when trust has been quietly built up over time, and then the partnership hits a crisis, a big decision, a challenge, and where it's become the deciding factor?
I think that's, again, a slightly different question. I think it's always a deciding factor.
Interesting. Okay.
Never not a deciding factor. It's never not a differentiator. So the problem is that once you lose trust, once you've breached the trust, corporately or personally, how do you go about rebuilding it? And, I've got 3 or 4 examples at the moment where it's come about through change of leadership on either side. When there's been some inverted commas managing up, and I think that you've got no choice then. How do you put this? Obviously you have to own the problem. You have to fess up, but I think you have to be open on the why. You have to be very open on the why, because what you can't do, much as you would like to, is talk your way out of something that you've behaved your way into.
Interesting.
You just can't, apologies are empty unless you, I don't know, set some, okay, this has gone wrong for this reason. It's, we have caused it. We're going to put it right. Why should you trust us now? Right. Over the next 3 months, we're going to do the following 3 things.
Yeah.
And you deliver 100%, and you earn that back on the sort of no surprises, update before you're asked, co-create a fix. Are those the 3 things that are the most important for the next 3 months? I think you also, and I've heard you speak about this before, you have to rebuild that social capital. You have to invest some time back in the people to people. But I think you also have to think about, why didn't I see this coming? Right?
Isn't that
this wasn't out of the blue. This didn't come from nowhere. This wasn't a Wednesday we loved each other and Thursday we'd lost trust.
Yeah.
Because, and again, I can think of loads of examples where, as a board, either as CEO or as chairman on receipt of it, I felt managed. I felt like I was being reported to, not to give information, but to reassure and stroke and, nothing to see here, all fine. I've got through the board meeting, I can carry on as before. And the lesson learned from that, Peter, I think, is that it's very easy sometimes to I was going to say manipulate, but let's just say present the hard data. We've all seen it, a KPI chart full of greens. Everything's green, a couple of ambers that we're working on, but everything's green.
Yeah.
It's all fine. It's all fine. And then suddenly you're facing an RFP.
Yeah.
And why does that happen? It happens because you're not looking at it back to, the soft power, the soft data. Where were those touch points on morale? The team is low morale. They're being bullied. They're being shouted at. The back chatting about the client.
Yeah.
Smiling to your face and actually saying, Christ, they're all a bunch of backstabbing bastards. I wish we didn't have to work with them.
Yeah.
And you think that, and everybody always knows. Everybody knows, the amount of time I spent a long time in advertising, and advertising is all about the long-term client relationships. It's all about the promise of results, shortening the odds to come up with an idea that's going to be fantastic. The number of times when people have been surprised that even with a good idea, they've lost the business, or suddenly it's out the pitch.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with the results. It's nothing to do with we've won an effectiveness award or whatever. It's the clients know that the team is back chatting.
Yeah.
The team is going, oh, that client's rubbish, and wouldn't know a good idea if it came up and bit it. People know.
Yeah.
They know when you genuinely want to co-create, co-own, work in partnership, share ideas early, not just ta-da, present a solution, but, this is what we're thinking of, and allow some input.
Okay.
Even if the answer's no, you get a chance to be heard. So people always know.
Yeah, interesting. Let me put you on the spot then for the final question.
Divorce never comes from left field, ever.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I take that one on board. Stevie, leaders listening to this are looking for guidance. They're looking for ways of doing things in this world of technology and AI and faster business cycles. For those senior leaders listening today that are thinking about, or how do I go about resetting and building trust in my partnership, what little bit of advice would you give them?
Again, it sort of sounds a bit do as you would be done by. But I think if you genuinely start from the belief that nobody comes to work to do a bad job, nobody.
Yeah.
Whether that's, somebody wanting to serve you in a shop or, do brain surgery. They come to do the best job they can. And in my perspective as a leader, people live up to or down to, importantly, your expectations of them. And that's not just your team internal, but your broader team of stakeholders.
Yeah.
I think if you have high expectations, people will want to delight you. I often use the difference between me and my sister.
Okay.
My late sister, sadly, but we had a completely different perspective on trust. So I have always wanted to believe the best of people, and my starting point has always been: you are innocent till proven guilty. I want you to live up to my expectations of you.
Yeah.
Brackets, God help you if you don't live up to them, if I've given you the resources to do that.
Yeah.
Because the worst thing that I can ever say to you is you have disappointed me.
Yeah.
That's worse than me screaming and shouting or whatever. If you disappoint me, it means that I have had expectations of you to deliver that you haven't.
Yeah.
Recognizing that I have given you the resources to do that. My late sister Sandy, was the complete opposite. You have to earn my trust. My starting point is you're going to let me down.
Yeah.
Prove me wrong. And I think that gives you a different type of leadership.
Yeah.
And it's therefore not surprising that she was an entrepreneur, she was an entrepreneur and I was an entrepreneur. I work within organizations.
Yeah.
I just think that I think that's a different perspective. But the key to answer the question is, I think, to get the most out of partnerships and working together, you expect people to deliver. You expect people to live up to your expectations. And most people want to.
Fascinating, Stevie. I wish I was still working for you. You're so inspirational.
We're working with Peter. Well, listen, we all make friends, colleagues, partnerships through our working lives, and they come and they go, and we touch base at different times. But those relationships endure even when they're absent.
Yeah. And I started with this session by saying I was honoured to have you on the show, and I repeat that. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. I feel as though we've only been talking for 5 minutes. Thank you for having me.
If you want to learn more about trusted partnerships, go to the show notes. And if you need help in bringing your partnership work to deliver the outcomes others are achieving, reach out to me. Our details are in the show notes, and I work with organisations that recognise trust as a performance advantage. A huge thank you again to Stevie Spring for today's conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, leave a quick review, and join us next time. Until then, I'm Peter Johnson. See you on the next episode of The Partnership Edge.
This is XTP Media.